The Crystal Cave, read by Chuck Brown. Deep in the whispering woods, where the trees hum soft songs and the air sparkles with tiny bits of light, there lived a young fox named Ruby. Her fur was the color of autumn leaves, red and orange and gold, all mixed together like a sunset painted on silk. And her eyes were bright like morning stars that had just learned how to shine. She had a white-tipped tail that she was very proud of, fluffy and perfectly shaped, and small, neat paws that barely made a sound when she walked through the forest. Ruby lived in a cozy den at the base of an old oak tree that had been growing in that spot for more years than anyone could count. The tree was so large that 5 foxes holding paws couldn't wrap their arms around its trunk, and its branches reached so high that they seemed to tickle the clouds. The den was lined with the softest moss Ruby could find, gathered from the north side of rocks where it grew thick and green. She had also collected fallen leaves in shades of gold and crimson, dried flower petals that still held their sweet scent, and bits of sheep's wool that had caught on bramble bushes. Her bed smelled like earth and rain and honey, and all the good things of the forest combined into one perfect sleepy smell. Every evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and purple, Ruby would return to her warm den after a day of exploring and playing. She would wash her paws in the little stream that ran nearby, groom her beautiful fur until it shone like polished copper, and then curl up in her comfortable bed to listen to the sounds of the woods settling down for the night. She loved hearing the gentle hooting of the great horned owls as they called to each other from tree to tree, the soft rustle of mice and chipmunks scurrying through the fallen leaves, the whisper of wind through the branches above her head, and the distant splash of beavers working on their dam by the big pond. Usually, these peaceful forest sounds would lull Ruby to sleep within minutes of lying down. She would close her bright eyes, take a deep breath of the sweet forest air, and drift off into dreams of chasing butterflies through meadows of wildflowers or playing hide-and-seek with her woodland friends. But tonight felt completely different from all the other nights Ruby had known. The moon was full and silver, hanging like a giant pearl in the dark velvet sky. Its light was so bright and clear that it turned everything in the forest into something magical and mysterious. The usual brown tree trunks looked like towers of silver, the green leaves seemed to glow with their own inner light, and every blade of grass was outlined in shimmering moonbeams. It was the kind of night that made Ruby feel like anything might be possible, like the whole world was full of secrets just waiting to be discovered. Ruby had eaten her usual dinner of sweet blackberries, tender young shoots, and crispy nuts that she had buried earlier in the week. But despite having a full belly, she didn't feel sleepy at all. Instead, she felt restless and curious and excited, as if something wonderful and magical was waiting for her somewhere out in the moonlit forest. Her paws seemed to tingle with energy, and her ears kept twitching toward every small sound, as if they were trying to hear something special that hadn't happened yet. She stepped outside her den and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. The forest was more beautiful than she had ever seen it before in the moonlight. Dewdrops on spider webs looked like tiny diamonds scattered by a generous fairy. The bark of the old trees seemed to shimmer with silver paint, and even the ordinary rocks and fallen logs looked like they were made of precious metals. Ruby stretched her legs and decided to take a walk along her favorite path, the one that wound between the tallest trees and led to the small stream where she sometimes went to drink and watched the fish swimming in the clear water. As she walked, her paws made soft padding sounds on the forest floor, which was carpeted with fallen leaves that crunched pleasantly under her feet. The familiar sounds and smells of her home forest made Ruby feel happy and safe and content. She passed the hollow stump where the raccoon family lived, and she could see them all fast asleep in a furry pile, their little hands tucked under their chins and their masked faces peaceful in the moonlight. She walked by the clearing where the deer came to graze in the early morning, now empty and quiet, except for a family of rabbits who were taking advantage of the moonlight to nibble on the tender grass. Ruby continued along the winding path, past the big rock that looked like a sleeping bear, past the ancient pine tree that had been struck by lightning years ago, but still grew tall and strong, past the patch of wild strawberry plants where she liked to hunt for the tiny sweet berries in the summertime. Everything was exactly as it always was, familiar and comforting and safe. But as she rounded a bend in the path, Ruby noticed something that made her stop in her tracks and tilt her head in puzzlement. There, just off the main trail, behind a thick wall of dark green vines that hung like a heavy curtain from the branches of two twisted hawthorn trees, was a gentle blue glow. The light pulsed softly and slowly, like a giant heart beating with calm, steady rhythm, or like the gentle breathing of someone deep in peaceful sleep. "How very strange," Ruby whispered to herself, her voice barely louder than the evening breeze that stirred the leaves around her. "I've walked this path at least 100 times, maybe even 200, and I've never seen that light before. I wonder what it could be." Ruby was naturally curious, as most foxes are, and she had always been braver than many of the other woodland creatures. So instead of hurrying past the mysterious glow, she decided to investigate. She approached the wall of vines carefully, stepping slowly and quietly so as not to disturb whatever might be causing the beautiful light. The vines were thick and old, their stems as wide as Ruby's paw and twisted together like an intricate braid. They were covered with tiny white flowers that looked like stars and smelled like vanilla and honey and fresh spring rain, all mixed together. The scent was so lovely that Ruby wanted to bury her nose in the flowers and breathe it in forever. When she pushed against the vines with her small paws, they parted easily and smoothly, as if they had been waiting for years and years for someone exactly like Ruby to come along and push them aside. What Ruby saw beyond the vines made her gasp with wonder and amazement. There, hidden in the hillside like a secret that the earth had been keeping for centuries, was the opening to a cave. But this wasn't any ordinary cave, like the dark, damp, scary ones that Ruby had sometimes seen in other parts of the forest. This cave was filled with the most extraordinary light she had ever witnessed. The walls were covered completely, from floor to ceiling, with crystals that glowed like captured moonbeams and starlight. The crystals were all different sizes and shapes. Some were as small as raindrops, perfectly round and clear, while others were as big as Ruby herself, towering like crystal trees. Some were long and pointed like icicles, reaching toward each other from opposite walls as if they were trying to touch and share secrets. Others grew in clusters like crystal flowers blooming in an underground garden, their faceted surfaces catching and reflecting the light in thousands of tiny rainbows. The entire cave was filled with the softest, most peaceful light Ruby had ever seen. It wasn't harsh or bright like the summer sun at midday, and it wasn't dim and shadowy like the light that filtered through thick forest canopy. Instead, it was perfectly gentle and soothing, the kind of light that made you want to curl up and take the most wonderful nap of your life. Ruby stepped inside the cave, and immediately she felt something magical happen. Her paws made no sound at all on the smooth crystal floor, as if the cave itself wanted to keep her visit secret and peaceful. The air inside was surprisingly warm and cozy, like being wrapped in the softest, most comfortable blanket on a cold winter night, or like sitting in a patch of gentle spring sunlight after a long, dark season. As Ruby moved deeper into the cave, she realized that it was much larger than it had appeared from the outside. The cave curved and twisted like a spiral seashell, leading her deeper and deeper into the heart of the hill. The crystal-covered walls seemed to pulse with life, breathing slowly and calmly in perfect rhythm with Ruby's own heartbeat. Tiny crystals hung from the ceiling like 1,000 falling stars, twinkling and dancing in colors she had never seen before, not just blue and purple and silver, but the palest green like new leaves in spring, the softest pink like the inside of a rose petal, and the warmest gold like honey in sunlight. As she walked deeper into the magical cave, Ruby began to hear something that made her ears perk up with delight. At first, she thought it might be the wind whistling through cracks in the rock, but there was no wind inside the cave. Then she thought it might be water running somewhere in the distance, but the sound was far too musical and lovely for that. Finally, she realized what she was hearing, and it filled her with wonder. The crystals themselves were singing. Each crystal, from the tiniest ones no bigger than dewdrops to the enormous ones that towered over her head, was contributing its own special note to create the most beautiful, soothing music Ruby had ever heard. The song was like wind chimes mixed with a mother's lullaby, like the sound of gentle rain on leaves mixed with the purring of a dozen contented cats, like all the most peaceful sounds in the world woven together into one perfect symphony. The crystal song made Ruby feel drowsy and peaceful, but at the same time, she was far too excited and curious to even think about sleeping yet. She wanted to explore every inch of this magical place, to see all its wonders and learn all its secrets. She followed the winding path deeper into the cave, past walls covered in crystals that looked like frozen waterfalls, past little alcoves filled with crystals that chimed softly like tiny bells when the breeze from her movement touched them, past formations that looked like crystal flowers and crystal trees and crystal animals sleeping in crystal gardens. The deeper Ruby went, the more beautiful the cave became. She saw crystals that looked like butterflies with wings spread wide, crystals that resembled sleeping cats curled up in cozy balls, crystals that formed perfect spirals reaching toward the ceiling like crystal vines. Some of the crystals were completely clear, like pieces of captured air, while others were filled with swirls of color that moved and danced as Ruby watched them. After what felt like a wonderful dream of walking through a palace made entirely of light and music, Ruby finally reached the heart of the cave, and what she saw there was so beautiful that it took her breath away completely. In the center of a large circular room with walls that rose high above her head was a pool of water so perfectly clear that it looked like liquid glass. The water was completely still, not even the tiniest ripple disturbing its perfect surface, and it glowed with the same gentle light as all the crystals around it. The pool was surrounded by the largest and most magnificent crystals in the entire cave. Some were taller than the biggest trees in the forest above, reaching from the floor all the way to the ceiling in columns of pure singing light. Others formed graceful arches over the pool, like a crystal bridge built for fairy queens to walk across. All of them were singing in perfect harmony, their voices blending together like the world's most beautiful choir. But the most magical and wonderful thing of all was what Ruby saw when she approached the edge of the pool and looked down into its glowing depths. Instead of just seeing her own reflection looking back at her with bright, curious eyes, Ruby saw something that filled her with amazement and joy. The water was showing her dreams, all kinds of peaceful, happy, wonderful dreams floating like clouds across its surface. Ruby sat down by the edge of the pool, curling her fluffy tail around her paws, and watched in fascination as dream after dream drifted slowly across the water. She saw dreams of flying through cotton candy skies on the backs of friendly butterflies with wings like stained glass windows. She saw dreams of floating on lily pads in quiet ponds, while frogs sang lullabies and fireflies danced overhead like tiny lanterns. She saw dreams of dancing in meadows filled with flowers that glowed like tiny suns, their petals soft as silk and their perfume sweeter than honey. There were dreams of sliding down rainbows into pools of warm golden light, dreams of sleeping in nests made of the softest clouds, dreams of playing hide and seek with shooting stars that giggled as they streaked across the sky. She saw dreams of riding on the backs of gentle whales through oceans made of liquid starlight, dreams of having tea parties with the moon and all the planets, dreams of building castles out of the flower petals and morning dew. Each dream was more beautiful and peaceful than the last, and just watching them drift across the surface of the magical pool made Ruby feel calm and drowsy and perfectly content. She felt as if all the worries she had ever had were melting away like snow in warm spring sunshine, leaving her feeling light and happy and wonderfully sleepy. As she sat there, completely mesmerized by the parade of beautiful dreams, Ruby heard a soft scraping sound behind her, like someone moving very slowly and carefully across the crystal floor. She turned around and saw the most remarkable sight: a wise old turtle emerging from the shadows between the largest crystals. This turtle was unlike any turtle Ruby had ever seen or imagined. His shell was decorated with hundreds of tiny crystals that matched the cave walls perfectly, arranged in intricate patterns that caught the light and threw rainbows all around the room as he moved. The crystals on his shell seemed to pulse gently with their own inner light, and they chimed softly with each step he took, adding their own gentle notes to the cave's external song. The turtle's eyes were the kindest and wisest Ruby had ever seen, deep and calm like still pools of water, full of knowledge and peace that came from having lived for many, many years and having learned all the most important secrets of being truly happy and content. His movements were slow and dignified, each step careful and deliberate, as if he were performing a graceful dance that had been choreographed by time itself. When he spoke, his voice was like the sound of smooth river stones that had been worn perfectly round by countless years of flowing water, gentle and warm and infinitely comforting. "Welcome, little fox," he said, bowing his head in a greeting that was both formal and friendly. "My name is Sage, and I am the guardian of this sacred place. This is the Cave of Peaceful Dreams, and you are the very first visitor we have welcomed in more seasons than I can count. It has been many years since someone has been able to find their way past the vine curtain and into our magical sanctuary." Ruby felt honored and excited to be the first visitor in so long. "It's the most beautiful and magical place I've ever seen," she said, her voice filled with wonder and respect. I never imagined that anything so extraordinary could exist. How long have you been the guardian here, Sage?" The turtle smiled, and all the crystals on his shell sparkled brighter, sending dancing rainbows across the cave walls. "I have been the guardian of this cave for longer than the oldest trees in your forest have been growing, little one. Longer than the hills above us have worn their current shapes. Longer than the streams have followed their present paths. The crystals here are very special and very powerful. They hold all the calmest, happiest, most peaceful dreams that have ever been dreamed by any creature in all the woodlands and meadows and mountains for hundreds of miles around." Ruby looked around at all the thousands of glowing crystals with new understanding and amazement. "You mean all these beautiful crystals are actually made of dreams?" "In a way, yes," Sage explained, settling himself more comfortably on the crystal floor, his movements graceful despite his great age. "When any creature anywhere in the great forest sleeps peacefully and dreams happy dreams, dreams of safety and contentment and joy, those dreams create a very special kind of magic. That dream magic is lighter than air and brighter than starlight, and it finds its way here to our cave, no matter how far it has to travel." "What happens to the dream magic when it gets here?" Ruby asked, fascinated by this explanation. "Over time, over many years, the dream magic crystallizes and grows into these beautiful formations you see all around us," Sage continued. "Each crystal holds the memory and the feeling of perfect contentment, of absolute safety, of the kind of deep, restful sleep that makes everything in the world seem right and good. The larger crystals have been growing for centuries, fed by thousands and thousands of peaceful dreams." Ruby thought about this remarkable process as she watched the crystals pulse gently with their inner light, each one a repository of countless peaceful nights and happy dreams. "But why can I see this place now?" she asked. "I've walked past this spot so many times before, but I never noticed the blue glow or the vine curtain. Why is tonight different?" Sage's ancient eyes twinkled with wisdom and kindness. "The Cave of Peaceful Dreams has its own special magic, little Ruby. It only reveals itself to those who need its peace the most. The cave can sense when someone's heart is troubled, when sleep has been difficult to find, when worries have been weighing heavy on someone's mind. Perhaps you have been feeling restless lately, or maybe you've had trouble settling down at bedtime. The cave calls to those who would benefit most from its healing magic." Ruby realized that Sage was absolutely right. For the past several weeks, she had been feeling increasingly restless and worried. She had been having trouble falling asleep, tossing and turning in her usually comfortable bed while her mind raced with all sorts of concerns. She worried about whether she was collecting enough food for the coming winter, whether the other forest creatures really liked her and enjoyed her company, whether she was brave enough and smart enough and good enough to handle all the challenges that life might bring her way. These worries had been growing stronger each night, making it harder and harder for Ruby to find the peaceful sleep she needed. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling of her den, listening to all the other forest creatures sleeping soundly around her, wishing desperately that she could quiet her busy mind and drift off into restful dreams. "The crystals will remember you now, dear Ruby," Sage continued, his voice growing even more gentle and soothing. "Once you have been here and heard their eternal song, Once you have felt their peaceful light warming your fur and calming your spirit, you carry a piece of their magic with you forever. No matter where you go or how far you travel from this place, the cave's peace will always be a part of you." "Really?" Ruby asked, her heart filling with hope and gratitude. "The magic will stay with me always?" "Always and forever," Sage promised solemnly. "That is the greatest gift of the Cave of Peaceful Dreams. Whenever you feel worried or restless, whenever your mind is too busy to let you sleep, whenever you need to remember what it feels like to be truly calm and content, all you have to do is close your eyes and think of this place. Remember the crystal song. Remember the way their light feels on your fur. Remember the dreams floating like clouds across the surface of our sacred pool. The magic will come to you wherever you are, and you'll feel that same deep peace settling over you like the softest, warmest blanket." Ruby felt a warm golden glow spreading through her chest at these wonderful words. It was like having a tiny sun kindled to life inside her heart, filling her with light and warmth and perfect contentment. "Thank you, Sage," she whispered. "This is the most amazing gift anyone has ever given me." "You are very welcome, little one," Sage replied warmly. "But our time together tonight is not finished yet. Would you like to rest here in the cave for a while? I think the crystals would very much like to sing you to sleep. It has been so long since they've had someone to care for and comfort." Ruby nodded eagerly, suddenly realizing how wonderfully drowsy and peaceful she felt. All the restless energy that had brought her out into the forest tonight had been replaced by a deep, satisfying tiredness that made her want nothing more than to curl up in this magical place and sleep the most restful sleep of her entire life. Sage led her slowly across the crystal floor to a corner of the cave that Ruby hadn't noticed before. Here, the floor was covered with the most remarkable moss she had ever seen. It was silvery green in color, like moonlight reflected on water, and it sparkled with thousands of tiny bits of crystal dust that made it look like it was woven from starlight itself. When Ruby stepped onto the moss, it felt softer than silk, softer than the finest down from a swan's breast, softer than anything she had ever imagined could exist. "This is where the rare visitors to our cave can rest," Sage explained with obvious pride. "The moss grows here naturally, fed by the crystal magic that flows through the very stones of the cave. It will give you the most comfortable, most restful sleep you've ever experienced." Ruby walked to the center of the moss bed and slowly turned in a circle 3 times, the way foxes do before settling down to sleep. Then she curled up into a perfect ball, tucking her beautiful white-tipped tail under her chin like a fluffy pillow and letting her body sink into the incredibly soft moss. The bed seemed to mold itself perfectly to her shape, supporting every part of her body with gentle, loving care. As soon as Ruby was comfortable, something magical began to happen throughout the entire cave. The crystals began to change their song, shifting from the daytime melody she had been hearing to something even more beautiful and soothing. The music became quieter and slower, like the most perfect lullaby that had ever been composed, designed specifically to carry tiny creatures into the sweetest, most peaceful dreams. The light from the crystals grew softer too, dimming gradually to exactly the right level for perfect sleep. Not so bright that it would keep anyone awake, but not so dark that it felt scary or unfamiliar. The light seemed to pulse gently in rhythm with Ruby's breathing, helping her body relax more and more deeply with each breath she took. Ruby felt as if she were floating on a cloud made of starlight and crystallized dreams. Her body seemed to weigh nothing at all as it sank into the magical moss, and all the tension she had been carrying in her muscles for weeks melted away completely. Her breathing slowed and deepened, falling into perfect sync with the rhythm of the crystal lullaby. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she felt a wonderful drowsy peace settling over her like the gentlest, warmest embrace. The last thing she remembered before drifting off into the most wonderful sleep of her life were the sound of Sage humming along with the crystal song in his deep, comforting voice, and the gentle sight of peaceful dreams continuing to float like luminous clouds across the surface of the glowing pool. She felt completely safe and loved and protected, surrounded by magic and music and the most perfect peace she had ever known. Ruby dreamed the most extraordinary dreams that night. She dreamed that she was flying through forests made entirely of singing crystal trees, their branches chiming gentle melodies as she soared between them. She dreamed of swimming in pools of liquid starlight, while crystal fish swam alongside her, their scales sparkling like tiny diamonds. She dreamed of dancing with all the peaceful dreams she had seen in the cave's sacred pool, spinning and laughing with dream butterflies and dream flowers and dream clouds in a ballroom made of rainbow light. When Ruby finally woke, she felt more rested and peaceful and content than she had felt in her entire life. Her body felt light and strong, her mind was clear and calm, and her heart was full of joy and gratitude. For a moment, she lay still with her eyes closed, listening for the beautiful crystal song that had sung her to sleep. But instead of the magical music, she heard the familiar, beloved sounds of her forest home. Birds singing their cheerful morning songs from the branches overhead, squirrels chattering and playing as they searched for acorns, and the gentle babble of the little stream as it flowed past her den on its way to join the larger river downstream. Ruby opened her bright eyes and found herself back in her own cozy den at the base of the great oak tree. The morning sunlight was filtering through the green leaves overhead in golden shafts, and everything looked exactly as it always did. Her bed of soft moss and fallen leaves, her collection of pretty stones and interesting sticks, her small store of nuts and berries for winter. For a moment, Ruby wondered if the crystal cave and wise sage and all the magical things she remembered had been nothing more than a wonderful dream. But then she looked down at her paws and gasped softly with delight and amazement. Her paws were still sparkling with tiny bits of crystal dust, glittering in the morning sunlight like the most precious fairy dust. She looked at her beautiful autumn-colored fur and saw that it too was touched with the magical sparkles, proof that her visit to the Cave of Peaceful Dreams had been completely real and not just a product of her imagination. Ruby spent that day playing and exploring in the forest as she usually did, but she felt completely different from the way she had felt in weeks. She was calmer, more content, more at peace with herself and the world around her. The worries that had been troubling her seemed small and manageable now, and she found herself smiling and laughing more than she had in a long time. When evening came and the sun began to set, painting the sky in its usual shades of pink and orange and purple, Ruby returned to her den, feeling naturally tired and ready for sleep. As she settled into her comfortable bed of moss and leaves, she felt none of the restless anxiety that had been plaguing her for so many nights. Instead, as soon as she closed her eyes, Ruby thought about the crystal cave and wise old sage and all the wonders she had experienced there. Immediately, she could hear the faint, beautiful sound of the crystal song, like a distant lullaby carried on the evening breeze. She could see the soft, loving glow of the dream crystals behind her closed eyelids, and she could feel the perfect peace of that magical place settling around her like a protective cocoon of warmth and safety. Within moments, Ruby drifted off into the most wonderful, restful sleep, filled with peaceful dreams of crystal gardens and singing stones and all the happiness in the world. From that night forward, Ruby never again had trouble falling asleep. Whenever she felt worried or restless, whenever her mind was too busy with concerns about the future, she would simply close her eyes and remember the cave of peaceful dreams. She would think about the pool where happy dreams floated like clouds, the crystals that sang lullabies of perfect peace, and sages' kind words promising that the magic would always be with her. And the magic kept its promise. Every single time Ruby called upon the memory of the crystal cave, she would feel its calming power flowing through her, quieting her thoughts and relaxing her body until she slipped easily into the sweetest, most restful sleep. Sometimes, on very clear nights when the moon was full and bright, Ruby would take evening walks along the path where she had first discovered the mysterious blue glow. She would look for the wall of flowering vines, hoping to visit the crystal cave again and say hello to her friend Sage. But though she searched carefully every time, the vines remained closed, hiding the entrance to the magical sanctuary. Ruby didn't mind, though. She understood that the cave had given her exactly what she needed. Not just one night of perfect rest, but the ability to find that same peace and comfort whenever she needed it for the rest of her life. The crystal cave lived on in her heart now, a sacred place of healing and hope that she could visit anytime simply by closing her eyes and remembering. And sometimes, just as she was drifting off to sleep in her cozy den, Ruby was sure she could hear Sage's gentle, loving voice whispering across the forest. "Sleep well, dear Ruby. The crystals are singing for you, and their peaceful magic surrounds you always." Sleep well, little one. The crystals are singing for you too, and their gentle magic is yours whenever you need it. Let their loving song carry you safely into the sweetest dreams, where peace and joy and perfect rest are waiting for you always. The end.